I just saw Barry Brazelton actually, just about a week ago. He's 90, and I was so excited. I ran up to him and I said, you know, we use your research, which we do, in teaching about shaken baby prevention, because he's one of the first people who really recognized that babies cry without any particular reason, and they just cry, and he kind of informed. We have a program that teaches about babies cry, have a plan, and he's really the basis for that, so it's really funny to hear you talk about him. He's wonderful. I work at Children's Hospital. I also work at Mass General Hospital, and I work with a multidisciplinary team, which is not a typical model, actually, that physicians are usually trained in. Usually physicians are kind of like, well, I'm the authority and I know what I'm doing. So I have to just say that working on that team has really informed me about how wonderful it is to work with a variety of different professionals. And so I feel that you all are very fortunate to have each other as connections. And I love having this little guy, I just have to say, because he has enjoyed the breakfast more than any of you. I do want to just tell you a quick story just to illustrate how important community is. So just bear with me while I tell you about Matthew. He's a little boy who was a child of a man who's American and a woman who was from the Republic of Congo. He presented to our hospital with, he wasn't moving his arm, and nobody knew really what had happened. And when we took an x-ray, this is a little one-year-old, he had a fracture. Nobody knew what it was, how it had happened, so we went ahead and just, as we do, we looked a little bit to make sure there were no other injuries. And unfortunately, we found that he had about 5 fractures that his parents didn't know about or didn't know existed, allegedly. Because it became clear that this felt like it was probably a case of physical abuse, we admitted him to the hospital and did some other workup to make sure there were no other internal injuries. And we had a chance to really observe his parents. Both parents were very present at the hospital. They were very confused about what on earth had happened. And it was very interesting to observe them. The father was actually incredibly charming, really articulate. He seemed to spend much more time with Matthew than Matthew's mother did. Matthew's mother sat at the bedside quietly and didn't really talk to staff very much. And Matthew's father actually told us that Matthew's mother seemed depressed and that she really lost her temper a lot with the baby. And he essentially implied that he was concerned about her. So as is my habit, I went to meet with both parents separately, and I went and sat down with her and mentioned to her, she was from the Congo, and I mentioned that I had just heard on the radio that they had held their first democratic elections in 40 years. And she said, yes, I've spoken with my family, and in those elections there was a lot of local conflict, and my church was burned down in my homeland where I used to grow up, and all of our community events took place. So when I learned that from her, it really felt like it opened up a sense of how complicated her life really was. She had, not only did she have this child who was in the hospital with abusive injuries, she had a whole family at home that she was very worried about, and her main source of community at home had been burned down. When we reached out and made a report to the Department of Social Services, we began to get a very different picture, actually, of this family. And just to emphasize how important the community is and how important it is for us to be working closely with you when we look at these cases, it turned out that, in fact, there had been some reports of domestic violence between the parents, and the father had a history of actually being imprisoned for domestic violence in another relationship. And so at that point, the hospital staff really began to almost flip their view of what had happened. Many people had been expressing concern about the mother because she was so withdrawn, but in fact, it began to appear very likely that it was the father who had abused the child. So this child actually was placed in foster care with a goal, which I think is very common, of reunifying the family, or the mother with the baby. Father quickly withdrew from the picture. He just no longer even went to see the child in foster care, no longer interacted with his wife. And the mother actually worked extensively with her DSS caseworker. She was very motivated, although the caseworker was really concerned that she was clinically depressed. She worked within her community. She found employment, she found housing, and most importantly, she learned the skills of becoming a parent, as so many of you help families do. And I remember her caseworker being so proud when she explained that the mother was learning how to play with her child. No one had ever really taught her about her child and how to play with him. And the caseworker felt the turning point was when she saw mother smiling and laughing with her child, and she was really inspired by that. So this is really an example of a family that succeeded through the work of the community and the community agencies that were able to help her. And they, the mother and son were reunited and lived together and are doing very well. So that's a really, to me, an inspiring story about just kind of the power not only that DSS can have in reunifying families, but the community. I'm going to skip talking about all my Shaken Baby work, because I've worked with probably many of you in training those of you who meet with families to reach out to parents and talk to them about crying and how to handle that. And in doing that, I actually have really been able to learn about the marvelous network of community providers that's out there. I think when we're in the hospital, we don't really understand all of the local work that's going on. And I don't know if you can appreciate what a significant impact you guys have. You're probably, I think many of you may be kind of wrapped up in the burdens or the particular caseload or worrying about a particular family. But today we're really just celebrating all of the work that you do. Many studies show that even one person who forms a significant relationship with a family or a child can have an impact. And some of these children who are living in situations that aren't ideal with a lot of family stressors still will be able to reach a positive outcome, have a huge amount of impact in their community, and actually every life that you touch really does have a ripple effect. When you are inspiring that young teenager to achieve, higher goals, they then will have an impact on their peers, their family, and so I just don't want you to forget about that. When we look at studies about child abuse and child abuse prevention, one of the most effective, and actually one of probably the only demonstrated way of intervening and preventing child abuse is home visiting. The more complicated, expensive programs that have been made to address child abuse prevention don't work as well as those of you who just go to the home, work with the families, teach parents how to parent, help them connect to all the resources in their communities. So I just find all of you very inspiring. And I'm going to quote the Dalai Lama, who says, "Under no circumstances should you lose hope. Hopelessness is a real cause of failure. Remember, you can overcome any problem. Be calm, even when your external environment is confused or complicated. It will have little effect if your mind is at peace." And that's really, I think, that kind of sums up the feelings that I get from people who work in the community. In a calm, active way, you all are doing the work that really helps directly the families that are impacted by child abuse and neglect. And I just want to thank you for doing that.